As humans, we all make mistakes. Sometimes it's a simple slip-up, an oversight, or a misunderstanding. Sometimes it's trusting the wrong person or putting faith in the goodness of others that mean to deceive us. It was a bullet to the back of the head that ended the life of a young man found here at the base of the Three Gossips sandstone pillars in Arches National Park. And for more than 4 decades, he has remained an unidentified John Doe. It was an unfortunate mistake that cost police decades in their attempts to find missing teen Robby Peay. But its discovery, made by one determined detective, has made a huge difference in finally solving the case. Welcome to Arches National Park for the story of Robby Peay and the Three Gossips Grand County John Doe. Midday on a Saturday, February 12, 1983, a rancher hiking through Arches National Park discovered a partially decomposed body in a sandy wash near the base of the Three Gossips rock formation. The dead man was found sprawled on his back, wearing blue jeans, a light blue Van Heusen shirt, and a white baseball cap. Oddly, while he was found wearing white socks, he did not have on any shoes. The hiker promptly returned to the road approximately 100 yards away to flag down help and alert authorities. National Park Service personnel responded and notified the sheriff's office, who drove from the nearby town of Moab to investigate. The victim appeared to be a white male in his mid-20s and had apparently been shot. No identification was located in the man's pockets or in the area near his body. While his remains had been partially preserved by the dry desert air, authorities reported that only some soft tissue remained and that he was not found in what would be considered a recognizable state. Slightly curled light brown hair, as well as blonde eyelashes, eyebrows, and beard stubble had been preserved on the man's face. Unfortunately, no photos or recreations in his likeness have ever been released. The Grand County Sheriff's Office sent the body to Salt Lake City for autopsy, where it was determined that he had been dead somewhere in the range of 2 to 3 months. A preliminary report from the medical examiner confirmed that the victim had been shot in the back of the head with a .22 caliber bullet. Sheriff Jim Nyland told the media that they had not yet determined if the shooting had taken place in the park where the body was found or if it had occurred elsewhere. Deputies had performed a detailed search of the area using rakes and metal detectors and turned up a partially consumed pack of Camel brand cigarettes, but nothing else of note had been found. The sheriff called it an intensive investigation and told reporters that the state crime lab would be assisting in determining the victim's identity, utilizing the found man's fingerprints, dental records, and scars. Initial reports from the medical examiner estimated that the unidentified man was about 5 feet 9 inches tall, weighing from 165 to 175 pounds. Sheriff Nyland said that the dead man's details would be sent to all agencies in the National Crime Information Center network and the FBI, where his fingerprints could be compared to anyone arrested for a felony nationwide. He added that they had been contacted by several law enforcement agencies who had received missing persons reports, which were being checked by their department. However, no prints in the FBI database matched that of the dead man, and over time, several other possible matches were ruled out. 2 missing men had been closely considered. John Doe, a young man who had disappeared from New Mexico in 1983, fit the description, but was eventually excluded. Presumably found, his name no longer appears in any official missing persons lists. Robert Lynn Peay, missing from Provo, Utah, was also ruled out as a match for the unidentified John Doe. His details were similar to that of the dead man, but due to a forensic dental comparison, he was excluded from the possible matches for many years. Until one day, when a discovery made by one persistent detective changed everything. Inventive, industrious, and a bit of a rule breaker, 17-year-old Robby Peay had been living with his mother and older sisters in Provo, Utah in late 1982. When he was last seen, he was reportedly between 5'9" and 5'10" tall, weighing between 135 and 150 pounds. Robby had been the baby in his family. His mother, Lynn Peay, had given birth to 4 girls, but his father, Lynn, had always wanted a boy. So when one came up for adoption, they brought home 11-month-old Robby. As a child, he was well loved and doted on, especially by all of his older sisters. But when his parents divorced, they stayed with their mother, and Robby was sent to live with his father and paternal grandmother in Springfield, Utah, 5 miles south of the rest of his family in Provo. There, he struggled to live up to his father's expectations. My dad was into farming and animals, and Robby ended up having hay fever really bad, Robby's older sister, Chris Scobron, later said. In 1979, when Robby was just 14, his father, Lynn, and paternal grandmother, Florence Peay, were killed by a freight train when their pickup was hit at an unmarked railroad crossing. Devastated and grieving, he returned to live with his mother. He had been a pretty good kid in Springfield, not much of a troublemaker, though he had been caught once by police committing vandalism. But back in Provo, he began breaking more rules and skipping school. His mother, a devout member of the LDS Church, learned that he had procured a fake ID in order to purchase alcohol, a vice which she strongly opposed. The two butted heads frequently, and once after a bad argument, Robby left home and didn't return for several weeks. He did keep in touch, though, and called his mother from Colorado, where he had found temporary roofing work with a friend. Then, in September of 1982, Robby was arrested for a tobacco violation and sent to a juvenile detention center called the YDC, or Youth Diagnostic Center in Salt Lake City. Robby didn't mind being at the YDC so much, but he longed for his freedom. Also, he knew that authorities were considering placing him at the Utah Boys Ranch, a facility that has since become subject to multiple lawsuits and allegations of negligence, physical, and sexual abuse. Laverne told the media that Robby was adamant about not going to the Utah Boys Ranch. So, on October 7th, 1982, he and another boy escaped from the YDC. The other youth was quickly located and returned to the detention center, but he and Robby had parted ways nearly immediately, and Robby could not be found. As is the case with many runaway teenagers at that time, law enforcement's attempts to track down Robby were limited initially. They learned that he was in the area and communicating with several of his friends, though they could not locate him, and he did not go home. His mother, Laverne, worried about her son. Previously, he had reached out to her after several days to let her know where he was. This time, however, Robby did not call. Laverne held out hope that he would return. Robby knew that on his 18th birthday, he was due to inherit a substantial amount of money. Surely he would come home to collect it, she thought. But when that day came and went with no word from Robby, she began to really worry. It had been 10 months since he had run away from the youth detention center, and now his mother began to wonder if Robby had become a victim of foul play. Laverne went to the press and to law enforcement, begging for help finding her son. She told authorities that despite having been adopted as an infant, he never really seemed interested in tracking down his biological family. Furthermore, those records had been sealed by the court, and there was no evidence that implied he had ever attempted to unseal them. Police tried to determine if Robby had returned to Colorado for work, as he had done when he had run away in the past, but they could not find him there working under his own name or the alias Bobbert Casper, which had appeared on his fake ID. The police department in Provo received a tip that Robby had been living with a 56-year-old man after he had run away. This man, who, as best I can tell, has gone unnamed by authorities, was determined to be from the Netherlands and had started a relationship with the underage teen. Investigators working Robby's case tried to track the man down, but believed that he had returned to his home country and were unable to find him there. Police put Robby's name and details into a national database for missing people, as well as a federal database for missing and exploited children. Because Robby had been a minor, his fingerprints had never been taken during any of his various run-ins with law enforcement, so officials submitted his dental records for comparisons. The body in Arches National Park had been found in February of 1983, 6 months before Robby's 18th birthday, and 4 months after the escape from the youth detention center. While the deceased man somewhat resembled Robby, a comparison of those dental records found that there was not a match. Several other unidentified bodies, including one particularly promising lead in New Jersey, were closely looked at, but none were determined to be Robby Peay. 9 years after his disappearance, in January of 1991, Robby's mother had him declared legally deceased, and a headstone was erected in the family's plot in Provo. "It's hard to think he's dead, but I think he probably is," Laverne told Kevin Niendorf of the Provo Daily Herald. "The only thought that comes to me is if he's with Terry Denley," she went on to say. Terry Denley was an older friend of Robby's, whom he had met while living with his father. Laverne had never met Terry, but had recently learned that Terry was also missing. The Denleys had not seen or heard from Terry since 1985, around the same time that a warrant for his arrest was issued for a second-degree felony theft. Terry had been living normally in the Provo area for several years after Robby's disappearance, but perhaps they had run off together? Terry would have been 39 years old in 1982, 22 years older than Robby at the time he left home. But given the rumors that police had uncovered about Robby's relationship with an older man from Holland, perhaps the idea was not so far-fetched. Laverne's comments seem to be purely speculative, and unfortunately, I've uncovered nothing else to connect the two cases, and found no evidence of Terry's whereabouts since 1985. When Terry's father passes away in '89, Terry is left out of the obituary. In 1993, police received an anonymous tip that Robby and 2 other individuals had played a version of Russian roulette sometime in the days after he went missing. Rather than each person pointing a gun at themselves, the 3 played as a group, each putting the gun to the back of another's head before all simultaneously pulling the triggers. According to the tipster, Robby had been killed and his body buried near Timpanogos Cave, a national monument located north of Provo. However, despite a thorough search, no evidence could be uncovered to support this claim. Interestingly, more than 30 years earlier, when he was just 11, Terry Denley's older brother Aaron died of a gunshot wound to the head playing a similar game with a friend and a .22 caliber rifle. The similarities between this unsubstantiated tip and the actual family tragedy experienced by the Denleys appears to be just coincidence, though it did seem noteworthy. And actually, one of the biggest leads in Robby's case was about to finally be uncovered. Thanks to drought conditions and lowered water levels in 1993, Robby's pickup truck was spotted underwater in Antelope Canyon near Lake Powell outside of Page, Arizona. The truck had been found 350 miles south of his home in Provo and the Timpanogos Cave. Apparently, Robby had purchased the pickup with cash and off the record after his escape from the YDC, but before he fell completely off grid. Provo Police Lieutenant Chris Chambers told KSL TV5 that a rope or wire was tied to the steering wheel, and it appeared that the truck had been launched into the lake after the steering wheel was fixed in place. Authorities were able to find the person that sold Robby the truck and confirm with him that he had kept it in his name so that Robby could evade police back in 1982. Photos of Robby were also found in the cab of the vehicle, though I can't imagine what condition they would have been in after spending time underwater. Lieutenant Chambers states that police do not know how long the truck had been in the lake, only noting that it entered sometime between 1982 and 1993. It must have felt like finally progress was being made in the investigation into Robby's disappearance. Hope for answers, hope for justice for the Peay family. However, after the discovery of Robby's pickup, it would take 25 more years until a new discovery was made in the case. In 2018, a detective reviewing Robby's file uncovered a mistake. 36 years earlier, the dentist who had entered Robby's dental records had submitted them upside down. When this mistake was corrected and the teeth compared to those of the three gossips' Grand County John Doe, they were almost an exact match. "It is likely," said Sergeant Shad Lefevre, "but it can't be 100% substantiated without DNA." His mother brought detectives a clipping of hair from Robby's baby book, but unfortunately, without the roots, not enough material was present for a DNA sample. With hopes of finding Robby's biological family, investigators petitioned a judge to unseal his adoption records, and at first were turned down. But after 2 more years, exhausting all efforts to conclusively match Robby to the unidentified John Doe, they resubmitted their request, and finally, in October of 2022, a judge signed the order. Now, with the names of Robby's biological parents in hand, detectives can track down his family and obtain DNA. Unfortunately, that task has proven difficult. "A lot harder than we anticipated," said Lieutenant Chris Chambers. Though he does not divulge their actual names, the lieutenant shares that there are people with similar names all across the country, and he notes that authorities did not receive the biological parents' birth dates. Lieutenant Chambers told the media that his detectives were keeping investigators in Grand County updated on Robby Peay's case. And if they do officially conclude that John Doe is indeed Robert Peay, the officials in Grand County can proceed with their cold case homicide investigation. A police report from 2019 showed that investigators were still trying to track down the man from the Netherlands that Robby had lived with after he had run away. Authorities don't call him a suspect or even a person of interest, but that man, who was 56 in 1982, would be 98 today, if he were alive, which makes me think that probably he is not. Robby's mom died in September of 2020, but his sisters still hope for closure. It's been 2 years this month since Robby's adoption records were unsealed, and there have been no updates to his case or the case of the three gossips, Grand County, Utah John Doe. If you have any information, please Reach out to authorities in Grant County, Utah, Provo, Utah, or call the Cold Case Tip Line.